The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, it's Katie McKnight here. I just wanted to say hi. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. If you could let me know that you're hearing me okay, just over in the chat section. If you could just give me a smiley face or a heads up or just say hi, then I know that everything is working on your end. Okay, so it's 6 o'clock my time, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I haven't heard anybody give me, I don't see any feedback down there in the chat area. As far as I hope everybody can hear me just fine. And so if you can hear me, if you can just type down here in the chat section and let me know that you're hearing okay. That would be great because I want to get started. We are recording this webinar, so you can refer to it in the future, and you'll receive an email tomorrow documenting your participation. You'll receive a certificate and also a link to the recording. So I'm just going to say hi here on my webcam as well. And hold on one second. It's loading up. So I just want to say hi, but I'm going to turn it off because it's a little distracting. So hello, everyone. All right. So let's go ahead and shut that down. And I want to make sure that all of you can chat. So give me one moment here while I check attendees to make sure that you guys can actually type in. So hold on one sec. Please hold. Okay. There we go. I see you now all. Okay, I see. It's all working here. Audio is excellent. Awesome. Okay, good, 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 good. I see Kathy here too, my friend in Arizona. I'm sure I just saw that it's like 100 and some degrees there. And Leslie Taylor as well. Yes, my key lime pie crowd down there in Florida. Awesome. Okay. Yay. Hey, listen, kudos to all of you for, it's summer vacation and here you are doing professional development. Are you guys nuts or what? But as our work as educators, it never stops, does it? So let's get started here. So We're going to look at growth mindset and literacy success, and I want to share with you just the growth mindset model and the success that it has fostered in quite a school, quite a few schools in which I work and districts, and how it really changes quite a few. Really starts closing that achievement gap. So let's get started here. I want to be respectful of your time. This is, of course, how to reach me at Literacy World on Twitter. Facebook, I'm at Katie McKnight Literacy, and you can always find me, email me at katieengagelearners at gmail.com. And I always love to hear from folks to keep the work relevant as much as possible. Just a little bit about engaging learners. We serve schools in the United States and internationally to really improve literacy skills and success for all students. As many of you know, 60% of our children in grades 4, 8, and 12 in the United States are not proficient readers. And as far as we're concerned at Engaging Learners, there is no reason for that. And how do we work to change that in our students and also foster the kinds of learning environment where we don't see that achievement gap? So we do quite a bit in professional learning. Many of you that are online right now, I know, I've had the privilege of working with you in your school context. And we also do quite a bit on standards-based assessment. I like to refer to it as skills-based assessment. And then also we do grant writing, because in many of our situations, especially in public schools, also private schools, where can we foster grant money? Where can we find funds to do the kind of professional learning and development that we want to do in schools, and professional coaching? Also, take a look at engaginglearners.com. We're about to revamp that website, but in the meantime, there's gobs and gobs and gobs of materials there for grades 4 through 12, all kinds of engaging literacy lessons that also develop content knowledge. So please keep in touch with us on our newsletter. And that new website is going to be launched in summer 2018, which I'm uber excited about. So, okay, so as I mentioned, that according to the National Assessment for Educational Progress, 60% of students in grades 4, 8, and 12 are not reading at proficient levels, meaning that they are not reading on grade level. And of course, I know for many of you, this is the reality in a lot of your contexts, so that it's really not a surprise to you. But it's interesting because folks that are outside of education, I've been interviewing quite a few web designers right now to revamp our website. And when I give them that statistic, they're blown away by it. They can't believe it, that that's actually true. And of course, that's a comprehensive statistic. It's not just in certain areas. And if we look at our children of poverty, it's even higher than that, 80 to 90%. So what are we going to do? What do we need to do to change that? Well, many of you might remember this, the good old electric typewriter. And of course, some of you might even remember this one. Check out that cutting edge technology once upon a time. And what's interesting is that I was in that last generation of college students that used electric typewriters. So the mark of a really great student in my generation was, could you get hands on materials? Could you get hands on information? So during that time, it was a shortcut when my professor or my teacher had an amazing amount of content knowledge. I was able to use them as a shortcut, because getting information was kind of an arduous task. I mean, I had to go into the Reader's Guide to Periodic Literature, and I'm sure some of you can remember that quite fondly. And then, of course, things were either on microfilm or they were on microfiche, right? And so we had to get our hands on materials. How did we do that? And again, our teachers were the portal for information. It was a shortcut. Well, things, of course, have changed, right? With smartphones and with the technology, kids have access to more and more information than they ever have before. And so now it's about making sense of that information and how are we able to do that? And of course, literacy skills are even in greater demand and greater sophistication than they ever have been before. So how do we create these kinds of learning environments where kids are developing their literacy skills and content knowledge to become 21st century ready? Well, I work with a good colleague of mine, Richard Cash, and he and I do quite a bit on on growth mindset and literacy development. And Richard's wheelhouse is growth mindset, self regulation, also gifted and talented. And he and I have been talking about, the affective, behavioral, and cognitive elements of literacy development. And I want to share this kind of model with you, what we've found on this journey and the success that we've had in schools as well. And I can see, Judy, you got our email earlier. I'm glad to see that you made it here. So I see that you're online. Okay, so let's look at these affective, behavioral, and cognitive elements. All right. So first of all, when we talk about that affective, that the feeling that you have about your learning and the excitement. And those of you who teach older students, and particularly kids who are not as skilled in their literacy development when they're older, so much of reading intervention with older kids, starting at fourth grade up, really has to do with the affective element, right? So how kids feel and such really has a huge impact on their learning and also developing literacy skills. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with gradual release of responsibility. It's recently been repopularized by the work of Doug Fisher and Nancy Fry. And as we go to more skills-based kind of standards that we find in Common Core and the Florida standards, and also Texas and Indiana, states that don't use Common Core. I didn't adopt it, but it's very much the focus now is on skills based standards. And that's different because we've had a huge shift, because it used to be that it was more content based, and it's really changed. So when we look at the gradual release of responsibility, it's also lined up, you can see, it's also lined up to the principles of like self-regulation too. So it's modeling and observing, copying and doing, practice and refinement, and then independence and application. So it's that I do, we do together, and then doing it independently. So the level of learner control and teacher control shifts. So when we start off, it's higher for teachers, lower for students, and then it starts gradually meeting in the middle when kids become more confident in what they do. And really develop the skills that they need in order to be successful. So this is a really critical slide. It's based on Dick Allington's work, and I'm going to share this with you, and really talking about literacy development, the importance of a balanced literacy framework in all that we do in schools, and how it leads to tremendous growth and achievement, and develops that growth mindset and developing kids into creative, into more independent learners. So Dick Allington found in a meta-analysis about 6 years ago, and it's published in Educational Leadership in 2012. I have the citation on the slide too. And by the way, the handout is available too. So if you look in the handout section, there's 3 out of 5 handouts, and there is a handout of the slide presentation as well. So you have that for your records. If you have any difficulty with it, just shoot us an email, and we're so happy to email it to you again, make things easy. But anyway, he found 6 things that led toward student growth and achievement. And of course, they're all situated in a balanced literacy framework. So if you do things like Daily 5, guided reading, you're probably very familiar with all of this. So the first is that every child reads accurately. So with the little guys, that means, that they have letter sound recognition, and that they have letter sound recognition. For older kids, that's more on the word level. So for instance, a kid may come across like tier 3 vocabulary, tier 3, like, very high level discipline specific vocabulary, and they are miscuing, that they're not quite understanding it, or not quite able to discern what the word is. They have difficulty decoding monosyllabic towards. So that's what that means, number one. And then, of course, number two is that every child reads something he or she understands. And there's quite a debate right now in the reading community about that. There are some that argue that kids need to read grade level text no matter what. But Allington found, as well as Willingham, who's a cognitive psychologist, that when kids read things that they understand, and it's true of adults, it actually engages the gray matter in the brain. So every child reads something he or she understands, and really critical to that development. And then every child writes about something personally meaningful, and that can also be very discipline specific too, about choosing an ending for a story, or what if this didn't happen historically? What could have happened? What do you think might have happened? And that also prepares kids too for evidence-based argumentation as well. And then talking to each other about our reading and writing and how critical that is. And that's also true in mathematics, that when kids have the opportunity to talk about their reading and writing, they're more likely to internalize it and develop greater understandings and mastery. So that's really quite critical. And then every child listens to a fluent adult read aloud, helps them to develop cadence and fluency. And that's where audio assist can be tremendously helpful, because it's not just us that they need to hear, but also hearing other adults read out loud. And that's why it's so important, those of you who teach young students early childhood, how critical it is for parents, for adults to read to their children at home. And of course, I don't need to convince you of the merits of that. I'm sure you see it in your classrooms, kids who are read to, and kids who may not have as much opportunity. And then every child reads something he or she chooses. And that doesn't mean that anything goes, but when we give kids some kind of choice within our classrooms, it really just fosters quite a bit of engagement and motivation. That's also part of that affective part as well, how critical that is to get kids interested in reading and writing. So this is a quote from my good colleague, my colleague Paula Maker, where she says that literacy is a process, not a program. And wow, I can't emphasize that enough. If it were as simple as buying a program for kids, then you probably wouldn't be on this webinar this evening or late this afternoon on your summer break, and learning about growth mindset and literacy success. You probably wouldn't be doing that. So these programs, they're great resources and such, many of them, but it really is about us, the educators, and how do we develop that confidence in our kids so that they can truly develop their literacy skills. So I hope I have some answers for you. I have a lot of ideas, and so here we go. How do you move that kid? How do you move kids to be an active reader and writer and engaged? Some of you may be familiar with some of these growth mind texts. The Growth Mindset Coach, love that book. And then Mary Coy Ricci's book. And then, of course, they all go back to Carol Dweck's work on mindset and the psychology of success. That when kids feel good about their learning, then they're more motivated. That's just the bottom line. So how do we bring that joy into our classrooms? How do we bring that excitement in? How do we get kids engaged in what we're doing? Okay, so Carol Dweck talks about defining fixed mindset. In a fixed mindset, and maybe you might know some of your students who might resemble some of this. That intelligence and talent are fixed traits. That once you're tracked into something, that's it. It doesn't change. And then emphasis is on documenting intelligence and talent. So letter grades, number grades, putting kids into tracking, things like that are kind of exemplars of that second bullet point. And then success is achieved because of intelligence and talent. And of course, what we know from Carol Dweck's work and many others, it's about the tenacity, right? And some people call it grit. I refer to it as being tenacious, sticking with it, being determined. That's how we get that success, right? And then in fixed mindset, and again, I'm sure many of you might know see some of your learners in this. this. Some of your students, they lack confidence. They have a lot of difficulty admitting, correcting mistakes. They usually won't ask for help. They get defensive about it. They don't recognize the need for effort. They feel that they're being judged. And then they really, it threatens their sense of ability or reinforces their lack of ability. So the example that I always use is, today, can I go run a mile? Probably not. But if I stuck at it and started walking and walking a mile and then did a run jog, yeah, I could probably do that. I could probably get up to running a mile and being pretty proficient about it. And then kids who have fixed mindsets or learners that have fixed mindsets, they don't develop that resiliency of skills. And those, many of you have earned your master's degrees or even further. I'm sure some of you have like 2 master's degree or might be working on a doctorate or PhD. I know for me that it was more about that resilience and just sticking with it, sticking with it, sticking with it. And then I reached the finishing line. So they don't develop that. They don't develop that kind of confidence. So how do we shift that mindset into a growth mindset? And here's what Carol Dweck says. And my friend Richard Cash, my work husband, he says that all of us should have this up in our classrooms. It's almost like a Mr. Rogers kind of thing of being the best you that you can be. And what it is this. Carol Dweck says that success is about being your best self, not about being better than others. Failure is an opportunity, not a condemnation. Effort, 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 effort is the key to success. And this is why proficiency scales and skills-based grading really fits in here. And I see it firsthand over and over and over that when we start using proficiency scales, and I know many of you still have to assign grades, but if the focus is on the proficiency scale and the skills, and if we have to assign a letter grade, so be it, right? That it's very clear what the A, B, C, D represents. So my next webinar in the summer webinar series is about proficiency scales. So it give you a heads up on what they are and some examples, some exemplars on how to use them. And even if your school doesn't adopt them, you can use them instead of rubrics. And so I don't want to give too much away because we're focusing on growth mindset and literacy success tonight. But I hope you can join me for that webinar too. And that's recorded just like all of them. So if you're out doing something fun, which I hope you are in the summer, you can always come back and refer to it as well. Okay, so this is a great classroom. This is a classroom in Michigan, and how do we inspire ourselves, right, to reflect on our professional practice and creating this atmosphere where we can exchange ideas and strategies and improve practice? Because if we want growth mindset in our kiddos, it starts with us. How do we reflect? How do we go into that vulnerable position? Because it is a vulnerable position. When I have to look at my practice, right? I've been an educator for over 30 years and I have things challenging my practice, my thoughts, my ideas. And, how do I incorporate these new ideas and share them with colleagues? So we got to start with ourselves first. And this is for my friend, Megan Coster, her classroom. And I was lucky enough to present with she and one of her colleagues at a national conference back in the spring. So tons of fun. But one of the things, look at these kiddos. They're all like in their centers and things, and they're just, we even have crayons out. It's a middle school classroom, and we got crayons out. That's pretty cool. So here's the plan, all right? Here's the plan, the big picture. And it really is about a balanced literacy framework. So whether you use something like Reader Writer Workshop, guided reading, this Two Sisters, I'm having a brain freeze. Daily 5, ding, 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 Daily 5, or what I've created with the Literacy and Learning Centers too, which is really a hybrid of all of those balanced literacy instructional manifestations. And I am actually doing a webinar on literacy and learning centers later. I think it's in August. So after I come back from vacation. So I hope that you can join me on that, and I really get into more of the nitty gritty on it. But it basically, what we need to do is start with a mini lesson. And the mini lesson should be about the number of minutes, the chronological age of your students. So if you're a second grade teacher and your second graders, of course, are 7 years old, then it's 7 minutes. If I teach seniors in high school, then I'm looking at 18 minutes. And that's the threshold. That is the limit. That's the saturation point. And then, of course, then we need to do some guided practice. And usually kids are in pairs or they might be in triads. So they're practicing what I just presented in that mini lesson. And then, of course, the last one is putting them into centers some kind, which are naturally conducive for formative assessment, differentiated instruction, building content knowledge, and RTI. Or you might use multi-tiered intervention in your particular school or state. So if we really focus on this pedagogy, all of these things really start falling into place. And here's the really exciting thing. I'm so jazzed about this. A district that I was just working with in Washington State, we started putting in the Literacy and Learning Center model in a middle school. And they just got their data back for Smarter Balanced, which if you're not from a Common Core state, that's one of the Common Core assessments. It's either balanced, Smarter Balanced, or it's the Park assessment. And they already found out that they went up over 10% on Smarter Balanced. And they also use STAR, which of course is the interim benchmark assessments, and they were seeing huge gains like that. And this is what I keep seeing. So notice I'm not telling you to buy a particular program. What I'm saying is that if we follow an instructional outline like this, just like Allington found in his meta-analysis, that's rooted in a balanced literacy framework where we model for them, and then they get some guided practice, some support, and then we put them in centers with clearly focused opportunities to talk to each other, to engage in the actual literacy skills that they're developing. They foster independence. And what I hear from colleagues all the time, and some of you are actually online with me, so when we have an opportunity for chatting later, perhaps you might mention, some of your experiences too. But what happens is that colleagues always tell me that they're really surprised how much their kids can actually do. And another thing that I get super geeked up about is the impact that it has on our kids with special needs. Huge impact. I did a chapter in my book on engaging all students in an era of changing standards. And there's a chapter in there. Two gals that I worked with in Farmington, New Mexico, wrote a chapter about how proficiency scales and balanced literacy models had transformed the performance of their children with special needs. So how exciting is that? And our colleagues are making it happen in classrooms all over the United States. And that's what's really awesome. So when we get into the centers, we've had the mini lesson, we have the guided practice, and this is what I suggest. So whether you teach the little guys, you have kindergarten, preschool, first grade, second grade, you can follow a model very similar to this. And if you need to adjust it based on what your kids need at a particular time, here's the deal. Do it. We are all really smart, beautiful and handsome people. So we know best how to meet the needs of our kids. So there's not one way to do this. But I will say, make sure that you have that teacher-led center, because that teacher-led center gives us the opportunity to give that immediate descriptive feedback. It's also an opportunity for us to evaluate work that the students have done and give them feedback on it and show them how they can get to the next level. Talking about growth mindset, right? So we say, hey, this is where you're doing a great job and this is what you need to do to improve. And I see it work all the time with primary classrooms, intermediate, middle school, and high school. Particularly middle school and high school. We don't see this as much in middle and high. But when I start seeing growth rates of 15, 16, 18% in one school year, then I get convinced. Because usually when folks tell me those kinds of numbers, I'm like, hey, what are you selling me? So it really is about developing literacy skills, and the content is the vehicle to do it. And then the next is that reading together that gives kids more practice, writer's craft, and then vocabulary. And depending on your content area, you can add even more additional centers. So if I'm teaching social studies, I might have primary source documents, maps, viewing something. Same thing in science. I might have viewing. I might have them look at something under a microscope. In mathematics, could be giving them practice time. They could be working on more sophisticated problems. If I have students who need to work on a particular skill, a prerequisite skill, I can bring them to me first in that teacher-led center. And the other thing that colleagues tell me is that they're not bringing as many papers home to grade. And how exciting is that? I don't know about you, but when I was in the classroom full time and also teaching college, it seems like I always had papers with me, always. And then if I didn't get to them by Sunday night, I felt guilty about it too. So wouldn't that be spectacular? Because we know that on the spot, right there feedback is really critical to foster that growth mindset and developing those skills. This is a video. I'm going to share the link with you because I oftentimes have difficulty when I show it on the webinar. But if you want to see this in action, this is the video to see. So when you get the follow-up email tomorrow with your certificate of participation, I will share this link with you because it's about a 15-minute video. But if you want to see what I'm talking about with classrooms and the centers, I encourage you to check out this video. And also, if you go to my YouTube channel too, you go to Katie McKnight on YouTube. This is there as well as about like 30 other classroom videos that I've put together and interviewing colleagues and teachers and talking about their classrooms and how they've developed growth mindset and literacy success. And they also give little tips too, like how do you organize all the paperwork that students produce in centers? How do I time kids? How do I move them from center to center? And that's on my YouTube channel, which is Katie McKnight Literacy. So you might want to check that out as well. And then, but wait, there's even more. This is the website that I was talking about where you can get all kinds of lessons. Like, for example, one of the things that I have are tons and tons of grammar lessons that use manipulatives to develop grammar skills. Because, and I did this years ago before we knew so much about the neuroscience, but when kids have concrete models for things that are abstract, it helps them conceptualize it and making those neurological connections. So there's all kinds of things in there too, and you can sign up for a free membership. So that's at engaginglearners.com. So this is how we implemented things. I'm going to give you an example of a school that I worked with in Farmington, New Mexico. And this is how we started. So those of you who might be administrators, but also teachers too, it's a little overwhelming, right? When we first look at that model and it's like, you want me to do what? You want me to do how? Whoa, so how do we get started on it and start building capacity, inch by inch by inch, okay? So the phases of implementation that I recommend are this. The first is just changing physical environment. So if your kiddos are in rows right now, get them out of rows. Start putting them in collaborative groupings. Where they can actually move from place to place. Put them in a structure that fosters discussion and dialogue. And then I always say you've got to make your instruction chunky. So start looking at what you do now and how you can chunk your instruction so it's really meeting the needs of the kids neurologically, developmentally. Once kids hit that saturation point, if I have, for instance, fifth graders who are wait, 3, 13, 12, 11, 10, 10, right? They're 10 years old. Fifth graders, 10 years old. And I'm lecturing. And after 10 minutes, I'm still lecturing. Guess what happens? Boom, it's reached the saturation point. It literally spills out of their brain. It doesn't come out. And then, or they don't retain it. So making instruction chunky and changing physical environment. And then the next is increasing cognitive load. So we want to make sure that we're giving kids challenging texts that they can handle, that we're giving them choice, that they're asking great questions, and we're really pushing them on those higher levels of understanding, whether you use Marzano's taxonomy, Bloom's taxonomy, or depth of knowledge, but making sure that we're pushing them to those higher levels of understanding. And then assessment and feedback. And I want to point out that these aren't mutually exclusive. They're really synergetic and recursive. So it doesn't mean that I'm not going to talk about or focus on assessment and feedback when I'm looking at changing physical environment. Of course I am. It's going to kind of happen organically. But my point is, let's just focus on these things at this point, because if we try and focus on everything at once, it's overwhelming. I don't know if it's overwhelming for you, but boy, is it overwhelming for me. So this is what it looks like in greater depth. So in phase one, looking at the seating, movement, getting our kids to move. And I had a colleague say, Katie, in pre-K, kindergarten, first, second, we want them to move all the time. And then after about third grade, we work as hard as we can so they don't move anymore. So I mean, that's really captures a lot of it. And then chunking instruction, as I mentioned, and then 10 to 15 minutes is just kind of just to remind you that we have to do that developmentally. And then writing out directions. Written directions are so critical, and incorporating student choice when we can. Not all the time, but when we can. And then phase two are those collaborative, higher order thinking activities, and then activities promoting learning goal mastery that they're tied. Ooh, I just saw I had a typo that's going to make me nuts. Tied to skilled based proficiency scales. So it should be SKILED. It's going to make me nuts. So actually, let me do this right now because, I can't help myself. It's the literacy educator in me. Gotta fix it. All right. And then of course, phase three is looking at more assessment and feedback. So when we look at phase three, we are also looking at formative assessment, tiered intervention. So whether you call it MTSS or you call it RTI or response to multi-tiered intervention, that's what I'm talking about. And then that descriptive, on the spot, immediate feedback. Okay. And then also that teacher-led center. I'd love to see you get it going in phase one, but a lot of folks get really nervous about it. So if you have to kind of wait until you feel more comfortable and that your kids are kind of grooving along, that's fine. Because remember, there's not one one way of doing things. Hey, Heather, I just saw that you had a question there too. You said, what do you think of flexible seating to foster learning? Yes, absolutely. We move kids around based on what the task is. And so flexible seating is also a reflection too of flexible grouping as well. And we group kids based on ability, readiness, and choice. So your flexible seating is also going to reflect that kind of philosophy as well. So thanks for the question. And just so you guys know too, I will definitely be answering questions at the end. So one of the things that we've done in two of the schools where I worked, and this one is in Farmington, New Mexico, is after we kind of got rocking on it and rolling, we created a center-based leadership team, which were colleagues. And the center-based leadership team was in response to model implementation of our balanced literacy and learning center model. And then we wanted to really address sustainability. I was working in this district for about 3 years, but I should be working myself out of a position and the team and engaging learners. Like, we get you started, get you rolling, kind of give a checkup and stuff, but it really is up to us as the educators, to foster that sustainability. And then the center-based leadership team was made up of one teacher from every core subject. So for primary, for younger grades, elementary, we would probably want somebody from each grade level. And then all grade levels are represented. levels of experience. So some of our leadership team members were more novice teachers, newer to the profession. And then we had one who was 1 year away from retirement, but she had become the center's queen in her school. But really, it was about pure respect and how well we could support each other and deliver messages, because we want all of us to be successful. So it's not just growth mindset with our students, it's with each other as well. And how do we foster that learning community as professionals, so we can really move mountains and get that achievement gap closed. So what the leadership team did, the center-based leadership team, they did things like peer observation. And it wasn't a judgment thing. They would say, hey, I see you're chunking instruction. Hey, I see that you are grouping your students. And have you thought of this? I tried this in my classroom. So it's really a discussion. It's a discussion about our pedagogy and what we do as educators. Um, and then the teachers who came in, the leadership team, they had colleagues come in and see them and how they implemented centers. And many of the teachers said that it was invaluable to go into a colleague's classroom and see how they were doing it, and how reassuring it was that they weren't quote unquote doing it wrong. And that's what we do as educators. We tend to want to do everything right? And the point is that if you focus on what Allington identified in that balanced literacy model, not only are you going to have growth mindset and literacy skill development with your students, it also changes the dynamic of your teaching and what happens in your classroom. It's really exciting. And so here's what happened. Here's some really, I already shared with you the one middle school that I was working with, and we just found out after a year of implementation that we already had double-digit growth. At Mesa View, we had two schools, and Mesa View was identified as an F school. And then in 2014, 2015, they were a D. 2015, 2016, they were a B. Last year, they became an A school. They did have a new principal during the process, but this is important that the faculty remained relatively stable in that 3 year process. And that's kind of important too, because the faculty is changing a lot. It is more challenging. It brings another element into it as far as developing the growth mindset. Um, the school is transformed. It's amazing. It's really exciting. And I included in the handouts a case study about the school that you can check out and look at the demographics and such. Teacher performance changed as well. So on teacher evaluations, most of the teachers were in the effective to minimally effective categories in 2014, 2015, but you can see that the majority, it all shifted then, where teachers were in the effective and highly effective range. And they use a Danielson type framework, and many school districts use that based on Charlotte Danielson's framework. Here's another thing too, is that they looked at different demographics. And to point out, I want to add too that their free and reduced lunch at the school is about 88%, so it's pretty high. And we see also shifting with overall in 2015, 2016, we saw 10% growth. Math had 6, but this is the really exciting number. The following year, look at the growth that they had, because the mind shift had changed. We had a growth mindset in our kiddos as well as in faculty. I mean, this is insane. Check this out. You know, the math going up 26, 23%. Those are insane kinds of growth. And so whenever I see growth like that, I have to be honest that I start getting a little bit suspicious and I start digging into the data. And but they were on track to become an A school, and that's what happened that year. You can see it in their data. Another school too, in Indianapolis, they were threatened. They were threatened with state takeover, and this was several years ago. This is when Richard Cash and I were first starting to use like growth mindset in schools. And you can see what happened. This is 2014, 2015. They're in Indiana, that you can start seeing this growth. This is Indiana. This is ECA passing trend, which was a state assessment at the time. This is the corporation. So this is Indianapolis Public Schools, and this is the actual school. So you can see that they were here, and then they went boom, and then they went boom. And you're probably wondering, well, what happened here? Well, the assessment changed. They jumped back up again, and then they went down again. And what happened is that there was a change in leadership. So I want to point that out. But when Richard and I were working with the teachers and the faculty was stable, principal was stable, this is the kind of growth that we were seeing. We were seeing a shift of over 10 percentage points in that school. So it does and can happen, but then when administration shifted, big change in faculty and such can really impact that growth, right? Here's another one too. East St. Louis, 99% of their kids receive free and reduced lunch. It's one of our most impoverished communities in the United States. Park, which is a Common Core assessment, they saw improvement in both the middle schools and high schools. On NWEA data, they had documented double-digit growth. It was about 15 to 16% in the middle schools and about 18% in high school. Lincoln Middle School went up from meeting targets on their interim assessments from 2.6 to 13.1 in 1 year. That's crazy progress, absolutely gargantuan progress. And 68% of their students, the class of 2019, were meeting their growth targets. 68%. We went from like single digits to that kind of growth. Amazing, amazing, amazing. And I know Kathy in her school district, in her school, I'm giving a shout out to Kathy. I've worked in her school as well, and they had huge growth this year in their middle school, their upper grades in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And here's also Freshmen on Track. This is again East St. Louis, and you can see huge growth. The district is the olivey color green, and then the emerald green is the state of Illinois. So you can see Freshmen on Track in 2015 was 4, but that's not the most reliable data for a lot of reasons. So if we just take 2016 and 2017, you can see huge growth. This is really the measure that they use is kind of a obviously it's not the data is skewed. And then also I want to show you well, actually, I also want to mention too that in other districts where I've had the privilege of collaborating, this is what we're seeing. We're seeing the double digits growth. So it really is about shifting that growth mindset. So we as teachers, as educators, as principals, as superintendents, we need to live that growth mindset. And I try to do that too when I have professional learning opportunities, is that I also want to improve that as well. So I always mention some things that I've learned along the way too that have to change my thinking about teaching and what I do, because based on what we've learned, especially with what we're finding out about the neuroscience and learning, it's fascinating stuff. I get really nerded up on that. And then also chunking our instruction, right? And then higher level questioning. And then focus on skill development. I cannot emphasize that enough. When we're focusing on skills and we're using content as a vehicle to develop skills, this is when the magic happens. Movement, movement. We know from neuroscience that we can actually see neurological connections being created when kids are moving in their learning. And centers can help foster that. And then that the kids need to move to learn. So before I take questions, I just want to remind you too, this is where you can find me, KatherineMcKnight.com. I'm at Literacy World, and then my Facebook page as well as Katie McKnight Literacy. A lot of this is changing right now as we're redeveloping our website, so I'll keep you posted on that as well. So yeah, so I'd love to take questions that you might have. So if you would go ahead and you can either type out your question, or if you want to raise your hand, I can give you the mic and you can ask your question. So either one is just fine. Just let me just go ahead and ask away. Actually, Kathy, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, um, I would love to have you talk a little bit about how your classroom has changed. So, if you just want to give me a hand, I'll turn on your mic and give you some such. Okay, so Patty just asked me. She says, "Can you be a bit more specific as to how teacher performance effectiveness was evaluated? I'm familiar with Danielson as a teacher evaluation tool. Specifically, how did teachers' evaluations change?" Well, it was the same instrument, and of course, every district and state have different evaluation systems. But in New Mexico, their teacher evaluation system is based on the Danielson framework, and there's specific domains. If you Google Charlotte Danielson, the domains are explained, and it's becoming more and more kind of like common. That is kind of becoming the standard in the industry, if you will, and the go-to. So what specifically some things that Danielson looks for are collaboration in the classroom, relationships between teacher and student, that you have outward evidence that when you're observing the classroom that students are learning and hitting learning targets. So those are very, very kinds of basic examples. But in that particular district in Farmington, their evaluation system is based on Danielson. So if you Google Charlotte Danielson, I'm sure there's also, I believe there's also a TED Talk about that Charlotte Danielson gives, explaining her framework for teacher effectiveness. And she always intended it to be a coaching tool and not necessarily to be used for evaluation. But districts all over the United States, it's become quite commonplace. In many districts to use that. So, Patty, if you want to, I'd be more than happy to even send you more information. If you want to email me directly, I'd be happy to do that. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit. But those are the kinds of things that they're looking for. This one domain, it's domain 3, really looks at what is happening in the classroom and how students are learning. Okay, so Kathy, here we have, like, I didn't even know Kathy was going to be on the webinar tonight, to be perfectly honest. So I'm going to give Kathy the mic right now. I'm going to unmute you. All right. Okay. Are you there? Hey, Kathy, are you there? Oh, maybe Kathy's mic isn't on. Maybe your mic isn't on. Hey, Kathy, I'm going to send you something that says to accept you as making you a co-presenter. All right, so you should be able to talk now. Going once, going twice. Okay, all right. I'll catch Kathy again. All right, and then Tracy just said, which site? Oh, thanks for the clarification, Tracy. It's at engaginglearners .com. That's what you want. That's where all the awesome lessons and stuff are, and we're always adding more material there. So, and I would love to get your feedback too, because I want it to be useful for colleagues as well. Judy says that she's going to be in her first year of kindergarten. Woohoo! And am thrilled. So welcome to kindergarten, right? The land of the little people. And am thrilled. I'm looking forward to setting up my classroom. Did you say that I could get yeah, it's on Engaging Learners, and also go on to Katie McKnight on YouTube. And just so you know too, I most of my work is with older guys, is with 3 and up, 3rd grade and up. But a lot of the things that are there you can use. But I also recommend too, for those real little guys, for kindergarten and such, go to the Daily 5 website. They have such good stuff there, and it's going to be more developmentally connected to your little guys. So that's an excellent resource. Highly recommend them. Love the two sisters. So you might want to check that out. And then Kathy, so Kathy says, sorry about that. We just couldn't get the technology to work the way that we wanted it to. But she says, Kathy says, one thing I would say is that my classroom changed. Students that were not proficient with reading and writing were able to orally explain and connect their ideas by using centers and having academic conversations. And I know too from Cindy Nelson, the learning coach. Keep forgetting what Cindy's official title is. She's kind of like jack of all trades and the wingman for the principal. But she said that you guys went up like double digits in the older grades, which is so crazy exciting to see that kind of growth. Okay, and then Heather Collins writes, I have a combined class, of fourth and fifth grade learners. Lucky you. And any suggestions for the bang for my buck when using growth mindset? Yeah, the centers and really building that tenacity, teaching kids to stick with it. And if you have proficiency scales and such, then with your fourth and fifth graders, you may be working on the same skill, but you want to evaluate on different levels. And you're probably going to say to me, Heather, hey, where can I get these proficiency scales? And here's the deal. I'm working on that book this summer. So if you follow my newsletter, I'll let you know when that comes out. I'm going to have proficiency scales, ELA, sample ones that you can actually use in your classroom and customize for pre-K all the way through 12th grade. So I've been busy working on that because so many of our colleagues keep asking for that. But what proficiency scales do, and I hope you'll join me, Heather, for the next webinar, and it'll be recorded if you're unable to, but how to use proficiency scales. They're very different from rubrics. They build that growth mindset because it's a continuum of skills and how you go from the very basic to the more complicated. And it also helps to build that growth mindset. But it really is, back to that Carol Dweck quote of just, teaching your kids to be tenacious and to keep at it and to keep working at it over and over and over again. I am going to also have an upcoming podcast too. My podcast is Too Lit, Urasi, ladies. I'm typing it in the question area, and that has just started. It's available on iTunes and such that you can get that there. And I'm going to be doing more on growth mindset and such there. So I want to be respectful of everybody's time. It's summer break. Woohoo! And I want to thank all of you so much for being here and asking great questions. As always, please, please let me know if there's anything that I can do, share information with you, or if I didn't get to your questions at all. I do see Patty just said too, I'm charged with bringing learning centers to our 4th through 6th grade. How can I begin to instill a growth mindset with my staff who find every excuse not to do LLCs? Boy, Patty, email me. You and I will talk. We'll pick up the phone and have a little chit chat about it. I've got some ideas for you because I've certainly dealt with that as well. Yes, use proficiency scales for grades, Heather, and come to the next webinar and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, that's the teaser. So I'm gonna drop the mic and thank all of you very, very much again for coming to the webinar. And please let me know if there's anything that I can do or any resources that I can share with you, any suggestions that you have for an upcoming webinar, and I would love to do that with you. You can see Hello Kitty in the back there with my Chicago Cubs World Champions hat back there. Hopefully it won't be another 100 years before they win again. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great night.